"You're not going to be using that field this season anyway, are you?" She said it the way people say things when they have already decided the answer. Diane Coulter, president of the Millhaven Ridge Community Association, standing at the edge of my wheat field in a blazer the color of a corporate letterhead, tablet tucked under one arm and a surveyor's flag in her other hand, orange, the kind they use for utility marking, pressed into my soil like a claim. Behind her, a gravel road cut a raw scar through the center of the field, maybe 12 feet wide and 200 yards long, the wheat on either side standing in broken rows where the grading equipment had pushed through. The smell of turned earth was still in the air, diesel exhaust underneath it. The morning light caught the exposed subsoil in a way that made it look pale and wrong, the way a wound looks before it closes. I looked at the road, I looked at her. I said, "That's my wheat." She smiled the way people smile when they think the conversation is already over. "The association has been granted access for community infrastructure. You'll receive documentation." What Diane Coulter did not know, what none of them knew, was that the road they had just graded, the easement they claimed to have been granted, the infrastructure they were so confident about, all of it sat on land I owned outright. The deed was in a file cabinet in my office, third drawer, behind the property tax receipts going back to 1987. I had never sold that strip. I had never granted an easement. I had simply never been asked. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're from. And if something like this has ever happened to you, I want to hear it. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt standing at the edge of that field, looking at Diane Coulter's orange flag pressed into my ground, was something closer to curiosity, the particular kind of curiosity that comes when you already know the answer, and you are waiting to see how long it takes everyone else to catch up. It took 6 months, and by the time they did, the number on the table was not small. My name is Calvin Reese. I farm 340 acres in the Millhaven Valley, in a county where the soil runs dark and deep, and the winters come in from the northwest with a kind of patience that teaches you things. I have been farming this land for 31 years. My father farmed it before me for 22, and before him, my grandfather, Elias Reese, broke the first ground here in the spring of 1951 with a borrowed tractor and a deed he had earned by working 6 years on another man's farm and saving every dollar that did not go to food or shelter. Elias was not a man who talked much about what he owned. He talked about what he had built, which he understood to be a different thing. He built the original farmhouse from timber milled on the property. He built the grain bins that still stand in the southeast corner of the acreage, their corrugated steel sides gone the color of old pennies holding their shape against every winter since 1963. He dug the drainage channels by hand along the Northfield boundary, moving clay soil in wheelbarrow loads until the field drained properly and the yield came up. He did not do these things because someone told him to. He did them because they were his, and he took care of what was his. When Elias died in 1979, the land passed to my father, Raymond, under a will that was straightforward and unambiguous. When Raymond died in 2004, passed to me under the same clarity. The deed I hold today is a direct chain of title going back to the original county grant in 1948, recorded in full at the Millhaven County Recorder's Office, Book 14, page 211. 4 generations of continuous ownership, unbroken, undisputed, paid in full. Every tax assessment, every survey, every recorded instrument, all of it in order, all of it filed, all of it mine. The wheat field in question, the one Diane Coulter was standing in with her orange flag, was the north parcel, 47 acres of Class II agricultural soil that Elias had first planted in winter wheat in 1954. It had been in continuous cultivation since then, rotated every few years between wheat and soybeans depending on the market, but always planted, always tended, always producing. I had planted that particular stand the previous October, a hard red winter variety. By the time Diane Coulter arrived, it was coming into its spring growth phase, the kind of dense, even green that takes years of soil management to produce consistently. The Millhaven Ridge development had gone in on the hillside to the east of my property in 2009. 312 homes, a community center, a small commercial strip. I had watched the construction from my fields without particular concern. Developments come and go in farming country. The important thing, always, is where the boundary lines fall. My boundary lines were exactly where they had always been. The development was on the hill. My fields were in the valley. There was no ambiguity, or so I believed. The community association had incorporated in 2010, the year after the development was completed. Diane Coulter had been on the founding board and had served as president for 11 of the 13 years since. She was, by every account I had heard from neighbors, a person who understood her authority to be broader than it was written. My neighbor to the south, a retired county engineer named Walt Graber, had mentioned her name to me twice over the years, both times with a careful expression that said more than the words. "She's a determined woman," Walt had said once, which, in his vocabulary, was not a compliment. I had no formal dealings with the Millhaven Ridge Community Association until the morning they graded a road through my wheat field. What they claimed, as I would come to understand through the documentation Diane Coulter promised, was that the association had been granted a public access easement across the north parcel by the County Planning Commission as a condition of a 2021 infrastructure agreement. The road, they said, was a community access corridor connecting Millhaven Ridge to the county road on the far side of my property, reducing traffic on the main development road and satisfying a fire safety requirement for secondary egress. It was, according to the letter I received 3 days after Diane Coulter's visit, certified mail, return receipt, the kind of envelope that announces its own seriousness, a lawfully established easement, recorded at the county, and the association had every right to proceed with construction. The letter was signed by Diane Coulter and by a man named Gregory Faust, identified as the association's legal counsel. It was 2 pages, dense with the kind of language that is designed to end conversations before they begin. Words like duly authorized and recorded instrument and failure to accommodate may result in enforcement action. There was a reference number for the easement, Millhaven County Recorder, instrument number 2021-04471. I wrote that number down on a notepad. Then I drove to the county recorder's office. The recorder's office in Millhaven County is a single-story building attached to the courthouse, staffed by 3 people who know every document in that building the way a librarian knows a collection they have maintained for decades. The woman at the front counter, whose nameplate read Patricia, had worked there for 22 years. I handed her the instrument number and asked to see the recorded easement. She pulled it up on her screen, printed it, handed it across the counter without comment. It was 4 pages. I stood at the counter and read all 4 of them before I moved. The easement document was real. It had been recorded. It bore the signatures of 2 county planning commissioners and the signature of Diane Coulter on behalf of the association. It described a 12-foot access corridor across a parcel identified by its assessor parcel number running from the eastern boundary of Millhaven Ridge to County Road 7. The parcel number was there in the document, clear as anything. APN 1400720003. I knew that number. I had written it on tax returns for 31 years. It was the north parcel. My north parcel. The 47-acre wheat field. What the easement document did not contain, what it was missing entirely, what made everything that followed not just possible but inevitable, was any signature, acknowledgement, or recorded consent from the landowner of APN 1400720003. From me. The County Planning Commission had recorded an easement across private agricultural land without the landowner's knowledge or consent. Whether that had happened through error, through an assumption that the land was public, or through something more deliberate, I did not yet know. What I knew, standing at that counter with Patricia's printed copy in my hand, was that the instrument was fatally defective. An easement granted across private land without the owner's consent is not an easement. It is a trespass dressed in paperwork. I thanked Patricia, took the copy, and drove home. The gravel road was still there when I pulled in, cutting through the wheat field like a sentence someone had written in the wrong place. I parked at the edge of it and sat for a moment looking at the broken rows of winter wheat on either side, the pale exposed subsoil between them, the orange surveyor's flags still in the ground at intervals along the corridor. The flags were the kind that come in bundles of 100. Whoever had placed them had used them freely, as if the land were theirs to mark. I went inside and called an attorney. Her name was Susan Halverson. She practiced agricultural and real property law out of an office in the county seat, 40 minutes south. Walt Graber had given me her name 2 years earlier in a different context, and I had kept it. She had the manner of someone who had spent a long time reading documents that other people had written carelessly, had developed a particular patience with the consequences. I told her what had happened. I read her the instrument number and the parcel number from the easement document. There was a pause on her end of the line. They recorded an easement on your land without your signature, she said. That's what the document shows. Another pause. Do you have your deed? Third drawer of my file cabinet, I said. Bring it, she said. Bring everything. I pulled the deed that evening. It was in a manila folder behind the property tax receipts, exactly where it had always been, the original recorded deed from my father's estate, a certified copy of Elias's original 1951 deed, the complete chain of title documents that Susan would later describe, with the closest thing to warmth I had heard from her as a property lawyer's dream, 4 generations of clean, unbroken title, every transfer recorded, every tax paid, every boundary surveyed and on file. I put the folder on the kitchen table and sat with it for a while, the way you sit with something that has been quietly waiting to be useful. Outside, the wheat field was going dark in the early evening, the green rows interrupted by that pale gravel scar running through the middle of it. The orange flags were still visible in the fading light, small bright points against the soil. Diane Coulter had pressed one of those flags into my ground as if it were a period at the end of a sentence she already finished writing. She had not yet understood that the sentence had barely begun. The first letter Susan Halvorson sent went out on a Tuesday, certified mail, return receipt requested, addressed to Gregory Faust at the association's legal counsel address, and to Diane Coulter at the Millhaven Ridge Community Association office, was 3 pages. I read it before she sent it, and I noticed that it was written in the same register as the letter I had received from them, dense, precise, designed to be understood by people who read legal instruments for a living. It opened by identifying me as the fee simple owner of APN 14072003. Citing the recorded deed by book and page number, it proceeded from there with the kind of methodical patience that Susan brought to everything. The letter made 3 points. First, instrument number 2021-04471, purporting to establish a public access easement across the north parcel, been recorded without the landowner's knowledge, consent, or signature, rendering it void ab initio under established property law. Second, that the grading and construction activities conducted across the north parcel in reliance on that instrument constituted an unauthorized trespass, had caused quantifiable damage to a standing agricultural crop. Third, that the association was required to cease all activity on the parcel immediately, to remove all equipment and materials within 14 days, and to preserve all records relating to the Planning Commission's easement application and approval process. Last item, preserve all records, was Susan's addition, and she explained it to me the way you explain something to someone who you trust to understand it fully. If there was a deliberate misrepresentation in the easement application, she said, the records of that process become evidence. Asking them to preserve records before litigation is filed is standard. It also tells them that you know what you're doing. The association's response came 9 days later. It was a single page, signed by Gregory Faust, and it said, in summary, that the easement had been lawfully recorded by the County Planning Commission under its infrastructure authority, that the association had acted in good faith reliance on the recorded instrument, that any claims regarding the validity of the easement should be directed to the County Planning Department. It did not address the absence of my signature. It did not address the trespass. It suggested in its final paragraph that I consider whether continued opposition to community infrastructure improvements was in my interest as a property owner in the valley. I read that paragraph twice. Then I set the letter aside and called Susan. They're pointing at the county, she said, before I had finished explaining. Yes, that's useful, she said. It means they know the instrument is defective and they're trying to find someone else to stand behind. We filed suit the following week. The complaint named the Mill Haven Ridge Community Association and the 2 county planning commissioners who had signed the easement instrument. It alleged trespass, conversion of agricultural property, tortious interference with the standing crop. It sought compensatory damages for the destroyed wheat, consequential damages for the loss of the growing season on the affected corridor, and because the trespass had been conducted in reliance on an instrument that the association had reason to know was defectively authorized, it sought exemplary damages under the state's agricultural trespass statute, which provided for treble damages where the trespass caused destruction of a cultivated crop. Susan filed the complaint on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, she had received a call from Gregory Faust asking whether we would consider mediation. He sounded, Susan told me, like a man who had just read the treble damages statute for the first time. I told her to say we would consider it. I did not say we would accept it. There is a difference, and the difference matters. The survey came back from the licensed land surveyor Susan had retained, a man named Dale Ostrander, who had been surveying agricultural parcels in the county for 34 years, and who had, as he told me when he walked the boundary, surveyed this exact parcel twice before, once in 1988 and once in 2003. He knew where the lines were. He set new iron pins at the corners, shot the bearings, produced a certified plat map that showed with the precision that only a physical survey can provide, exactly where the graded road fell in relation to my recorded deed boundaries. Every inch of it was on my land. Dale Ostrander delivered his certified plat map on a Thursday morning, rolling it out across my kitchen table with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that what he was unrolling was not just paper. The map was drawn at a scale of 1 inch to 100 feet, the boundary lines of APN 1400720003 rendered in precise ink, the iron pins he had set marked with their coordinates, the graded road corridor traced in a contrasting color that ran from the eastern edge of my parcel to County Road 7 like a wound drawn to scale. He had also noted, in a surveyor's annotation at the lower left corner, the locations of the 2 previous surveys he had conducted on the parcel, 198, 8 in 2003, and confirmed that the boundary lines had not changed by a single foot in the intervening decades. I studied the map for a long time. Dale stood at the edge of the table with his hands in his jacket pockets, not speaking, the way men who have spent their careers reading land tend to do when someone else is reading it. He had the patience of someone who had learned long ago that the land does not hurry, that the people who understand it tend to follow its example. "Every inch," I said. "Every inch," he confirmed. "The road corridor falls entirely within your recorded deed boundaries. There is no portion of it that crosses onto county right-of-way, association property, or any other parcel. It is wholly on APN 1400720003. Asked him whether the parcel number in the easement instrument matched the parcel on the ground. He nodded slowly. The assessor parcel number in instrument 2021-04471 is correct. They identified the right parcel. They just didn't secure the owner's consent before recording the easement against it. I thanked him, rolled the map carefully, put it in the Manila folder beside the deed. Susan Halverson had been building the file in parallel. While Dale was shooting bearings and setting iron pins, she had been at the county recorder's office and the planning department, pulling every document associated with instrument 2021-04471. The original application, the staff report, the commissioner minutes from the approval meeting, and the correspondence file maintained by the planning department throughout the process. She had also submitted a public records request for all communications between the planning department and the Millhaven Ridge Community Association regarding the easement, going back to the date of the original infrastructure agreement in 2021. The documents came in over the course of about 2 weeks, arriving in batches as the planning department processed the request. Susan called me each time a significant batch arrived, and I drove down to her office and sat across the table from her while she walked me through what she had found. What she had found was a paper trail that told a story, and the story was not flattering to anyone involved. The easement application had been submitted to the planning department in March of 2021 by Gregory Faust on behalf of the Millhaven Ridge Community Association. The application identified the parcel by its assessor number and described the proposed corridor in detail. It included a statement, signed by Faust, representing that the association had obtained the necessary landowner consents for the easement. The planning department's staff report, prepared in advance of the commissioner meeting, noted the represented consents and recommended approval. Commissioners approved the instrument at their April meeting without any independent verification that the landowner had actually signed off. There was no consent document in the file. There was no signature from me, no acknowledgement, no correspondence with me at any stage of the process. The representation that consents had been obtained was, as Susan put it with the flat precision she brought to everything, unsweltered by any document in the record. I sat with that for a moment. The smell of old paper was in the air of Susan's office, the particular dry smell of documents that have been handled and filed and retrieved many times. Thought about Elias, sitting at a different table in a different year, reading a different deed, understanding that the paper was the thing. The paper was what held. Unspertured, I said. There is nothing in this file to suggest that anyone ever contacted you, Susan said. No letter, no certified mail return, no phone record, no email. The representation was made, the commission relied on it, the easement was recorded. That is the sequence. She set the staff report down on the table between us and tapped a specific paragraph with one finger. The paragraph read, "Applicant has represented that all necessary landowner consents have been obtained and are on file with the applicant." It was a single sentence. It was the sentence on which everything else had been built. That sentence, Susan said, is the problem. For them, the complaint was already filed, but this new material changed its character substantially. Susan prepared an amended complaint that added a cause of action for fraudulent misrepresentation, specifically that the association's legal counsel had made a false representation of material fact to a government body in order to procure the recording of an instrument affecting private land, and that this misrepresentation had directly caused the trespass and the crop destruction. The amended complaint also named Gregory Faust individually, in addition to his capacity as association counsel. Faust's call, requesting mediation, had been followed by a second call, and then a letter, then a more urgent call after Susan filed the amended complaint. The tone had shifted measurably between the first call and the third. The first had the measured confidence of a man who believed he was managing a nuisance. The third had the quality of a man who had begun to understand the dimensions of the room he was standing in. Walt Graber came by one evening while I was walking the field boundary. He had seen Susan's truck in my driveway a few times and had put together, with the particular attentiveness of a man who had spent 30 years reading county plat maps, a reasonable picture of what was happening. He walked the boundary with me, his hands behind his back, looking at the graded corridor, the way a former county engineer looks at something that should not exist. "She filed that application in March of 2021, he said, after I had told him about the consent representation. I remember when the infrastructure agreement went through the commission. I was still attending those meetings then." He paused. "I don't recall any discussion of landowner consent for the North Parcel corridor. I remember thinking the routing was odd. I asked him if he would be willing to put that in writing. He looked at me with the careful expression I had come to understand as his version of warmth. I kept notes from those meetings, he said. I always kept notes. He brought the notes over 2 days later, spiral-bound pad with dates written on the cover in his precise engineer's hand, the relevant meeting flagged with a paperclip. The notes from the April 2021 commission meeting contained a single line about the easement approval. Millhaven Ridge Access Corridor, APN 14-007203, approved on consent representation, no independent verification noted, no landowner present. Walt had written that line in April of 2021 and had not thought about it again until I walked my field boundary with him on a quiet evening 3 years later. Susan received his notes with the same expression she had worn when I handed her the deed, quiet, attentive, the expression of someone adding a piece to a structure that was already sound and watching it become sounder. The mediation session was scheduled for a Thursday in late autumn, held at a conference room in the county courthouse annex, a room that smelled of carpet cleaner and the particular staleness of air that has been recirculated through too many difficult conversations. Diane Coulter was there in a blazer the same institutional gray as the one she had worn in my Whitefield, her tablet on the table in front of her, posture carrying the residual confidence of someone who had not yet fully absorbed what the documents said. Gregory Faust sat beside her. I noticed that he did not have the same posture. He had the posture of a man who had read the amended complaint and understood it. The mediator was a retired district court judge named Harold Veen, a compact man with white hair and the manner of someone who had spent decades listening to people explain why they were right and had developed a precise calibration for the distance between confidence and accuracy. He opened the session by asking both parties to summarize their positions. He listened to Faust's summary, which leaned heavily on the association's good faith reliance on the recorded instrument, with an expression did not change. Then Susan spoke. She did not summarize. She laid documents on the table in sequence: the recorded deed, Dale Ostrander's certified plat map, the easement instrument, the planning department file, the staff report with its consent representation paragraph, and Walt Graber's meeting notes from April 2021. She placed each document in order. She described each one in a single sentence, and when she was finished the table, held the complete record of what had happened, arranged in the order in which it had happened, and the record was not ambiguous. Harold Veen looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at Faust. "Counsel," he said, "the consent representation in the application. Where is the underlying document?" Faust said that the association believed the consent had been obtained through informal communications. Harold Veen waited. "There may not be a written record of the specific consent exchange," Faust said. Harold Veen nodded once, slowly, with the patience of a man who had heard many versions of that sentence and understood exactly what each version meant. He looked at the staff report paragraph, the one that said consents were on file with the applicant. Then he looked at the empty space where the consent document was not. "Mr. Faust," he said, "I want to make sure I understand the record. The application represented that landowner consents were obtained and on file. The Planning Commission relied on that representation to approve the instrument. The instrument was recorded against a private parcel, the document evidencing that consent does not exist." Faust did not answer immediately. "Is an accurate description of the record as it stands," he said finally. The room was very quiet. Diane Coulter's tablet was on the table in front of her, and she had not touched it since Susan began laying documents down. She was looking at the deed, my deed, Elias' deed, the chain of title going back to 1948, with an expression I did not try to read. It was not my business to read it. The record had spoken. That was enough. Harold Veen turned to Susan and asked what the plaintiff was seeking in resolution. Susan had prepared a settlement framework, and she presented it in the same measured cadence she brought to everything. Vacatur of instrument 2021-04471 from the county recorder's records. Restoration of the North Parcel Corridor to its pre-disturbance agricultural condition, including topsoil replacement and reseeding to the same winter wheat variety at the association's expense. Compensatory damages for the destroyed crop, calculated at the county agricultural extension's average yield value for Class II wheat ground, a figure that Dale Ostrander's survey and the county's own yield records had allowed us to calculate with some precision. reimbursement of attorney's fees and survey costs. She did not ask for treble damages. I had told her not to. The treble damages provision was in the statute, and its presence in the complaint had done its work. It had brought Faust to the mediation table with the posture of a man who understood the arithmetic. The threat of it had been sufficient. I did not need the money. I needed the record corrected. Harold Veen gave both parties a recess to confer. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench that had probably been in that building, since before Elias broke his first ground, I looked out a narrow window at the county road running south toward the valley. The fields were bare in late autumn, the soil turned and resting, the kind of quiet that comes after harvest and before the first hard frost, when the land is between things and gathering itself for what comes next. Susan came out of the conference room 20 minutes later. She sat beside me on the bench. "They'll accept the framework," she said. "Faust wants a mutual release, which is standard. He also wants the amended complaint's fraud allegations to be resolved as part of the settlement rather than proceeding to trial." I asked what she thought. "The fraud allegations are strong," she said, "but taking them to trial means another year, and the record already shows what it shows. The vacatur, the restoration, the damages, the fees, that's the outcome. The record is the outcome." She was right. The record was the outcome. It always had been. Told her to accept the framework. The settlement agreement was executed on a Friday 41 days after Diane Coulter had pressed an orange surveyor's flag into my wheat field and told me the sentence was already finished. The document was 11 pages, drafted by Susan Halverson and reviewed by Faust, and it accomplished in precise legal language what the record had made inevitable from the beginning. Instrument number 2021-04471 was vacated in its entirety and expunged from the Millhaven County Recorder's records. The Millhaven Ridge Community Association was required to engage a licensed contractor, approved by me, to restore the North Parcel Corridor to its pre-disturbance condition, topsoil replacement to a minimum depth of 8 inches across the full 12-foot width of the graded corridor, reseeding with the same hard red winter wheat variety at the agronomic rate appropriate to Class II soil, removal of all gravel base material and surveyor's flags within 30 days of execution. Compensatory damages were set at $14,240, calculated against the County Agricultural Extension's documented average yield for Class II wheat ground at the current commodity price multiplied by the corridor's acreage footprint as measured by Dale Ostrander's certified plat. Attorney's fees and survey costs were reimbursed in full. The mutual release covered all claims arising from the easement and the trespass. The fraud allegations in the amended complaint were resolved by the settlement and would not proceed to trial. Gregory Faust signed for the association. Diane Coulter signed as president. Harold Veen signed as the mediating officer. Susan signed for me. Signed last with the same pen I had used to write down instrument number 2021-04471 on a notepad the morning. I drove to Patricia's counter at the recorder's office, and I noticed that my hand was entirely steady. I want to be precise about what the settlement was and what it was not. It was not a punishment. It was not a humiliation. It was a correction, the legal system performing the function it exists to perform, which is to restore the record to accuracy when someone has written something false into it. The easement had been recorded without my consent. Now it would be unrecorded. The land had been disturbed, and now it would be restored. The costs of that disturbance had been borne by the people who caused it. That is the arithmetic of the thing, and I found it sufficient. What happened to Diane Coulter and Gregory Faust after the settlement was their business, not mine. I heard from Walt some weeks later the association's board had held a special meeting. Following the settlement, and that Coulter had stepped down as president, though whether that was voluntary or the result of board pressure he did not know. I heard that Faust's representation of the association had ended around the same time. The County Planning Commission, for its part, quietly revised its internal procedures for easement applications to require independent verification of landowner consent before any instrument affecting private land could be approved, a change that Susan mentioned to me in passing, with the understated satisfaction of someone who understood that the most durable outcomes are the procedural ones, the ones that prevent the same error from being made again. I did not attend the board meeting. I did not follow the internal politics of the Millhaven Ridge Community Association. I had the deed, the vacated instrument, the restored land, the record. That was everything I had needed from the beginning. The contractor came in late November to begin the restoration work. He was a careful man, methodical, in the way that people who work with soil tend to be, and he did the work properly, brought in topsoil from a certified agricultural source, incorporated it to depth, raked the seedbed level, seeded it at the rate Dale Ostrander and I had specified. I walked the corridor with him when he finished, the two of us moving slowly along what had been a gravel road and was now a seeded strip of dark, turned earth. The smell of fresh soil and autumn cold in the air together, the kind of smell that means something is beginning rather than ending. The flags were gone, every orange flag pulled and removed, the holes they had left already filled and smoothed. The gravel was gone. The raw scar was gone. What remained was a seeded strip that would, by the following spring, be indistinguishable from the rest of the north parcel, the same dense, even green that Elias had first coaxed from this ground in the winter of 1954, the same soil, the same variety, the same quiet patience of a field that knows what it is for. I stood at the edge of the north parcel in the early evening after the contractor had left, the way I had stood there the first evening after the grading crew came through, and I looked at the field in the fading light. The wheat rows ran straight and unbroken from one end of the parcel to the other. The boundary lines held exactly where they had always held. The iron pins Dale Ostrander had set at the corners caught the last of the light, small bright points in the soil, marking what was mine with the same quiet authority that the deed in my file cabinet had always marked it with. Elias would not have understood the legal particulars of what had happened, the instrument numbers, the plat maps, the treble damages statute, but he would have understood the shape of it. Someone had tried to write a sentence on his land without asking. The land had held. The paper had held. The sentence had been erased. There is a thing I have come to understand over 31 years of farming this ground. The understanding deepened through everything that happened with Diane Coulter and instrument number 2021-04471. It is this. When an institution with apparent authority makes a claim against you, against your land, your property, your rights, the first question is never whether they sound confident. Confident people are wrong with the same frequency as uncertain ones, and they are often more dangerous because their confidence discourages examination. The first question is whether their claim has a legal foundation. Not a rhetorical foundation, not a procedural assumption, not a representation made to a government body without supporting documentation. A legal foundation, and the answer to that question is always in the record. It is in the deed, in the plat map, in the recorder's files, in the planning department's correspondence, in the notes a retired county engineer kept from a meeting in April of 2021, because he had the habit of keeping notes. The record does not raise its voice. It does not perform confidence. It simply holds the way good soil holds, the way a well-set iron pin holds, the way a deed in a third drawer holds, waiting to be useful. Know your documents before they are challenged. Verify the legal foundation of any claim made against your property before you concede a single inch of ground. And understand that the paper, the deed, the plat, the chain of title, the recorded instrument is not a formality. It is the thing itself. It is what Elias understood when he earned this land dollar by dollar and recorded the deed in Book 14, page 211, and it is what I understood standing at Patricia's counter, reading 4 pages that told me everything I needed to know. The wheat came up the following April, green and even across the full 47 acres, the restored corridor indistinguishable from the rest of the field, the rows running straight and unbroken, from the north fence to the south. I walked the field on a morning when the light was low, and the air still carried the cold of the night before, the wheat at my knees, the smell of growing grain and damp soil around me, and I thought about Elias walking this same ground in the spring of 1955, the first full harvest season after he had planted it, seeing what the land could do when you let it be what it was. The orange flags were gone, the gravel road was gone, the easement was gone from the record, vacated and expunged as if it had never been written. The deed was in the third drawer of my file cabinet, exactly where it had always been, behind the property tax receipts going back to 1987, waiting quietly for the next time someone needed to be reminded of what the record said. It always says the same thing. It has always said the same thing. You simply have to know where to look. If any of this sounds familiar, a boundary dispute, an HOA overreach, a claim someone made against your land that didn't hold up when you checked the record, I'd be glad to hear it in the comments. And if you want to follow the next case, this channel is where it lands.